Ellie read my mind. Thank you so much. So friends, I'm psyched to be here today with you. John Crocker, I'm the Director of School Mental Health and Behavioral Services for Methuen Public Schools and the founder and director of the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium, which is a group of about 160 districts across the state gunning for quality and sustainable school mental health services for all. I am joined today by the glorious and wonderful Ellie Sanchez. Ellie is my co-pilot on this adventure, and we are happy today to talk to you about interventions across tiers of support. Now, this is not going to be a deep dive into any specific modality. We want to give you a sense of and strengthen your understanding of multi-tiered systems of support, and specifically relative to mental health services and social emotional learning. And I do not want to separate those things entirely. They're part of the same continuum of care. We don't want to foster this separate camps situation like SEL over here, mental health, behavioral health, substance use. We need systems of support to address all these things effectively. Does that make sense to people? You still want to actually be here? Well, that's good, because you're along for the ride. Okay, Thriving Minds, which is an effort and collaboration between the BRIGHT program, the Rennie Center, and the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium. We are providing a ton of PD and coaching and technical assistance to districts across the state, and to all for the purpose of developing comprehensive school mental health systems. So we'll talk about what a comprehensive school mental health system is if you don't know what it is. But at the end of the day, suffice to say that it is a system designed to support students across all tiers of support, giving them the knowledge and skills that they need to navigate stressors and guard against the onset of more serious mental health problems. And yes, direct provision of evidence-based therapeutic care to kids. So if you're interested in learning more about Thriving Minds and all the free stuff that we have to give away, lots of free trainings, lots of free opportunities for resources, then give us a ring. So in order to get you going in terms of engagement, I would love to hear you come off mute. There is a button that you can press where you can use words to communicate with me. It's wonderful. It makes me feel less alone in the world. So please chime in. You can also type in the chat if you're unable to come off mute. But what do you hope to gain today? What is it? What brought you here today at 3 o'clock? Well, 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. What do you want to get? And this is a small enough group so I can like directly harass each one of you individually to provide an answer. And I'm not above that. So there we go. Nick, what do you want to get out today?
So my name is Nick. I'm actually an intern with the Rennie Center. I'm attempting to get a sort of an outline of how these lessons function so that I can communicate the content of the lessons to a broader audience.
Nick, that's phenomenal. I love that. Thank you for being voluntold to participate. Appreciate that. What else? Who else is willing to share what you're hoping to gain today? Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, Felicity, go for it.
Hi, sorry. Well, so I've been doing some turnaround schoolwork on the different tiers and MTSS and everything. So when I definitely saw the title of this one, just any information I can get here and bring back to my school, I'm hoping even just one little nugget will be worth it. So
that's awesome. I appreciate you being here. Thank you. Who else wants to share? What do we think? I'm gonna pick on you, Lauren, because you're sitting outside, looking like you're having a blast. What are you hoping to get out today?
Well, I can't stay for the full duration, but I'm always looking for new ideas that I can incorporate into my own practice. Um, to answer what the prompt so that other people can do the same. Um, for May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm sure you're all aware. We did a lot of tier 1 stuff this month, and I was pretty proud of that. We incorporated our sports teams to wear lime green, be it like headwear, shoelaces, tie-dyeing their shirts. We had speakers from Minding Your Mind. I don't know if anyone has heard of them. They're absolutely fantastic. We had 2 different speakers come in, as well as John Mettleman, and they combine a parent presentation as well as student presentation. And the student presentation is really what had a big impact on the school. They have young adult speakers talk about their struggle with mental health, and they work with people through the company to kind of like curate their story in a way that touches on the importance of the different aspects of mental illness, but doesn't glorify any negative aspects of it, nor does it really like trigger many kids in a negative way. So they were absolutely great to work with, highly recommend. So that's something that we did school-wide, and I think it does wonders for destigmatizing mental health in the school.
Lauren, thank you so much for sharing that. Minding Your Mind has been pretty phenomenal. We've worked with them. Nadelman's a good guy. Really appreciate being able to work with him. So thanks for the share out. That's a wonderful tier 1 accomplishment, and kudos to you for the destigmatization that you've got working. I appreciate that. Lauren did such a good job of modeling the second question about what is one accomplishment you're truly proud of related to school mental health in your district. I'd love to get a couple more perspectives here. What's something that you've done really well this year that you want to showcase? Mary, Suzanne, Kelly, Julie, Lisa, Jennifer, Felicity.
I'll just say that I'm interested in learning some more strategies and interventions, and an accomplishment that I'm proud of is that we screened our 7th and 8th graders twice this year and provided groups after each and some decent interventions. So that feels pretty good.
Suzanne, that's a pretty huge accomplishment. What did you use for a tool?
Oh, of course you were going to ask me. We use the GAD-7, GAD,
Nice.
and the BSAD.
Wonderful. Suzanne, that's a huge accomplishment. Really appreciate you sharing that. Screening leading to group-based intervention, like that's a big deal. So well played.
It was good. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, Mary, go for it.
I'm so sorry. I'm really bad
No.
with timing on Zoom. One thing that I'm super proud of is that me and my 2 supervisors for next year, because of the rise in mental health needs amongst our students, we are implementing a DBT program next year. And that is so huge. It's going seamlessly into our wellness, which is, it's like our gym in a way, but it's like more yoga based, and we're integrating mental health because wellness is not just about physical health. So I feel like that's like a huge shift for us. So I'm super excited.
Mary, that's awesome. Love that. What district are you from, Mary?
I'm from Sturgis Charter Public School on the Cape.
Love it. Well played. Friends, I'm hoping that you get something out of today that will inform some of the things you're working on and maybe spark some ideas about next steps. I love this prompt, and I've heard people push back on this idea in a way that I didn't feel was like really super informed. So this idea of like, can the school environment be a therapeutic environment? Can it be a place that fosters protection, support, education? I love the definition. A therapeutic environment is a setting or environment designed to help people replace maladaptive thoughts, feelings, belief, and behaviors with more beneficial personal and psychosocial skills. I mean, if we boil it down, I'm going to give you a really simple example of something that teachers do all the time. Have you ever heard a teacher working with a kid say, hey, listen, like, I know you're nervous about this test. Why don't you try the first couple problems, then come back to me and see how it went. And then they go off and they finish the first two problems. They come back, they're like, I feel better about it. I'm going to keep going. Okay, great, thanks. That is a behavioral experiment. That is a cognitive behavioral therapy technique that's being implemented by a non-clinician in a classroom in a school. So I guess, like, I want to call out here that that's one very simple example of a way in which a therapeutic environment was fostered in a classroom. So my argument here is, can a school environment be a therapeutic environment? Yeah, absolutely it can. Absolutely. We all, I mean, many of you, many of the districts that I work with, you know, pride themselves on the fact that they are providing protection, support, and education to their kids. That is literally the goal of a therapeutic environment. We're helping our kids to navigate stressors so they can learn, but we're also helping them to navigate stressors so that they can navigate stressors, right? It's mental health is good because it's good. So I definitely think that, you know, keep this in mind. If you hear people saying, like, I don't know if there's a place for this work in schools, you know, I think it's really important to really couch that conversation in what a definition of a therapeutic environment actually is. I also think it's really important today, for sure, as we are in the wake of another really, really horrific tragedy, to emphasize how critical schools are in providing care to kids, that we are on the front lines of providing care to kids, and that this work is so incredibly important to the safety, support, and education of kids. We are part of that solution. And I would never want a tragedy to push us forward with making this work more visible. My hope is that we can all come to agree that this work is essential, not additional, not cute, not extra, not a plus one, but the core of what we need to do for kids. So therapeutic environment in schools, yeah, for sure. In fact, for some, it is the most therapeutic environment that they will have in their life. That's it. Let's keep going. I mentioned this concept of a comprehensive school mental health system. Give me a quick thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you are familiar with this concept. Anybody? No. Strange. Because I've talked to some of you about it. That's okay. So when we're talking about a comprehensive school mental health system, we're really just talking about another tiered system of support. It is a tiered system of support that provides a full array of services to kids. Now at tier 1, we're doing things like social emotional learning. We're doing things like mental health literacy. We're providing universal screening opportunities. Jim knows what a CSMHS is. I knew you'd be there for me, Jim. I appreciate that. Jennifer, welcome, by the way. Thanks for joining. It does include collaborative partnerships. And by that, I mean our community-based mental health friends that we love, that we want to incorporate into our service array, but that we cannot rely on to be the solution. They're part of the solution. We want to augment our services with them, but they can't be the solution. Not with rates of anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress rising to uncontrollable levels. We all need to be part of the solution.
John, would you mind if I ask a question? Around collaborative partnerships, like counselors coming into the school that accept insurance. I know you're obviously very familiar with the model. What would you say to people who disapprove of that model because it potentially threatens union jobs in schools for like
Okay,
school counselors?
yeah. I guess my first response would be, there's plenty of work to go around. There's no shortage of need. We can all play nice together. I think it's the case that ultimately a model like that requires really great communication and collaboration with the internal team. And I worry when it is a kind of just where this individual or set of individuals maybe will come in, provide a service, and leave without any communication with the internal team. There's no data sharing. There's no processing and consultation that's happening with the internal team. There's no collaboration with the internal team. So I think as long as it is a true collaborative partnership that augments the services that we provide to kids, that's wonderful. And I guess the question that I would ask is, are you currently satisfied with the amount and level of care that you can provide to kids? Have you completely saturated your environment with care such that there is no need left unchecked? And if the answer to that is yes, then please call me up, because you found the secret sauce and the solution to all our problems. But I'm gonna guess your answer is no. And if your answer is no, then quite frankly, it is our ethical responsibility to hunt down services for kids by hook or by crook, by any means possible. And if that is seen as a challenge, I guess my argument would be, keep advocating for more internal staff. There's no reason why you can't do that, but you also can't do that overnight. And in the interim, please make sure kids have support. That's an awesome question, Lauren. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because it's something that I think districts struggle with.
I think it's come up, and so there's like that piece of like the union job, and then I've also heard the piece like questioning whether it's an issue of equity, because not all students have access to that counselor if their insurance isn't accepted by that counselor. So those are the two like main things that I've heard against that type of partnership.
Yeah, the equity piece is a cute thing to throw on the table. Kids don't have access to care. We need to find care for them by any means necessary. And yeah, let's partner with lots more people so that we can cover all the insurance. But I guess, like, let's not turn a blind eye to an available support for some kids. It's not going to be, it has to be an amalgamation of supports. If we're looking for a perfect solution, it doesn't exist. But really great points, Lauren. Super appreciate you engaging in this session. Okay. One more piece of a comprehensive school mental health system that I'm going to harp on is evidence-based services and supports. We have to use evidence-based stuff. And I would press you to ask your people, or to really reflect on your own practice and say, do I use evidence-based therapeutic services? Do I use evidence-based curriculum? Is the stuff that I am using proven to be effective? Because if it's not, there's plenty of stuff out there that's free that you can get great training on, that is available through, that's available very quickly, and that you could get like tomorrow. I'm going to share some stuff with you today that can inform your practice. But I think it's really important that we reflect on whether or not the things we're doing are going to move the dial on care for kids. Because simply meeting with a student and maybe holding that time in your calendar doesn't mean that we're moving the dial on their well-being. We do have to do things that are drawing upon evidence-based practice. Cool? Make sense? Okay, let's keep going. So in this comprehensive school mental health system, there are some ideas that drive what this will ultimately do for you. All students are going to experience high quality basic education about mental health and self-care. We're talking about, that's the universal, right? SEL, mental health literacy. And we're going to screen them. Why? Well, quite frankly, if we don't screen kids, no one else is gonna. Schools are the prevention arm of the mental health system writ large. I've said that a million times. No other institution is better positioned to engage in the practice of universal screening. Can you imagine what would happen if we asked our community-based agencies to engage in universal screening? Get laughed out of the room. There's no way. And that's not me knocking community-based mental health. They are not designed to do so. We didn't design the system to allow for them to do that. They're pay to play. They wait for diagnosis and crisis. We did that. So we have to fill in the gaps and be the prevention arm of the mental health system and provide care to kids before diagnosis and crisis. How do we do that? We screen kids. We get ahead of problems. I've asked this question more times than I can count at this point, and some of you already know the answer, but for those of you that don't, what is the national average wait time for a kid to get care after they start to experience a mental health problem? How long does it take? On average, for a kid to get care after they've started to experience symptoms of a mental health problem, please type it in the chat. For our friends that are black screens of death, which I understand, appreciate. I'm just giving you a hard time. Yeah, type in the chat. Some of you know the answer. Some of you have typed the answer in the chat because you are ultimately cheating, which is fine. The answer is 8 to 10 years. That's absolutely absurd. 8 to 10 years. We don't get to change that reality if we don't orient to problems when they're smaller, emerging concerns. Screening is the ticket to cutting down that wait time. Okay? Okay. Emerging or moderate mental health challenges are provided with appropriate supports, maybe group-based supports, temporal supports, shorter in length, less intense, tier 2. And we're providing intensive individual interventions to kids at tier 3. All education and supports will be provided by well-trained professional staff, meaning we have to hire master's level clinicians, school counselors, school psychologists, adjustment counselors, social workers. We have to be sensitive to caseload size. I'm going to argue that 1 to 250, maybe if you're not providing comprehensive mental health care, but if you are, we need sub 200 caseload. That's it, for sure. All staff will be trained and consistently utilize common frameworks and language for mental health and well-being. And we need effective systems, referral systems, systems to evaluate progress, systems to monitor the efficacy of programs and interventions, systems to communicate, to access resources. This stuff doesn't just happen on its own. So we do need to write stuff down and have systems. Does this idea of a comprehensive school mental health system at least resonate with you a little bit, make some sense? Give me a quick thumbs up if this is making some sense. Okay. It's a big system. You know, I want to be honest. This isn't something that you can get to tomorrow, but you have to start to get to it tomorrow. You have to take that first step. You know, we talk about small tests of change leading to larger tests of change over time. And the call out here is start small, but start. You got to start somewhere. Okay, let's keep going. I'm gonna talk to you for about the next hour, and we'll have some activities about each of these tiers of support. and what you can expect to see across each tier. We're also going to talk about critical incident management a little bit, because that certainly sits pretty at tier 3. We're going to talk about the BRIGHT model. We're going to talk about special education programming, group-based services, SEL, all kinds of stuff. At tier 1, and I guess like before we even talk about that, I gotta give a shout out to the BRIGHT team and Paul Hyrie Dermuth for really, like, this is such a Paulism, this core plus more and core plus more plus more. I appreciate that because it really emphasizes that, you know, just because you're getting a tier 2 service doesn't mean we turn the tier 1 service off. Just because you're getting a tier 3 service doesn't mean we shut off the tier 2 service. You can have a kid enrolled in a tier 3 individual service. Oh, and they also happen to be in a group. And they also happen to be continuing to receive that SEL curriculum. So it's not about like you get this or that. It's you get this and that, and maybe that too, if you require that level of service. So at tier 1, we're looking at universals, things for everybody. When we're looking at, Lauren, no worries. Thank you so much for your engagement today. I'll see you at future sessions.
Okay, thank you.
When we are looking at tier 2, we're looking at things that are slightly more intense, things that maybe are temporal. Think group therapy, 8 to 10 weeks, 8 to 10 students, cognitive behavioral therapy driven, but it ends. It's supposed to end. It's a targeted group. It's focusing on maybe anxiety or depression and mixed internalizing. And then when we go into tier 3, we're talking about intensive individualized interventions. Think BRIGHT program, right? A service where it's super intense, multiple staff members, care coordination, talking about programmatic services. I'm gonna argue that individual counseling can be a tier 2 service, or it can be a tier 3 service, depending on the level of intensity. If we're talking about a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy service, 1-to-1 for 2 years, gosh, that's sounding like a tier 3 service. If we're talking about a 4-session brisk model individual counseling situation, yeah, that's feeling tier 2 for sure. Even though it's individual counseling, it's 4 sessions. So important to recognize that when we're talking about the different tiers of support, it's more about the intensity and duration of the support. That's what lands it in whatever tier we're talking about. The more intense, the more frequent, the higher the tier. Does that make sense to people? Mary's with me, Felicity's with me. Cool. Okay. Now, we're going to give some examples today of like what we would expect to see at the universal level. Things like classroom-based practices, school-wide practices, curriculum-based interventions that hit every kid, mental health literacy, things that happen. Here are some considerations for that core support piece. We've got school-wide practices that are happening, universal mental health and SEL curricula. By that, I mean things like maybe social thinking or second step, break free from depression, trails to wellness SEL curriculum, stuff like that. School-wide mental health SEL programs. So that could be maybe pushing some of those cognitive behavioral therapy techniques into the classroom so that everyone is using these supports for all kids. And trauma-informed classroom practices. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to do a resource review. You're going to walk away with an e-gift basket of trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive classrooms practice guide. When we talk about universal SEL mental health curriculum, a few examples that I think are worth sharing. So like mental health units in health class. By a quick show of hands, is that something that's happening in your district? Health curriculum incorporates some mental health Suzanne's a no. Julie's a yes. Okay. Felicity, kind of, sort of. Rebecca, no. Okay. It will next year, but currently no, says Mary. All right, fair. So this is a mix. This is a mix. I know that the new health frameworks that are on the way, I know that, you know, there's been some significant delays as a function of the world being on fire. But that being said, like that, my understanding is that there will be some expansion of the mental health focus in the new health frameworks. So food for thought for the future. SEL curriculum, there's a lot of curriculum out there. Maybe that's taught explicitly during morning meeting or advisory or specials. And then incorporating into the core curriculum topics around mental health. So brain science, growth mindset, project-based learning on mental health topics. So this is touching every kid. It's for everyone. It's the universal. And everyone's contributing to this too, all staff. I'm gonna guess this is a review for everybody, but I wanna call out this piece right here. When I talk about social emotional learning, I feel like it's important to call out that we're talking about knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So it's not just about educating students about vocabulary. It's about giving them skills to apply when they need to more effectively become self-aware or socially aware or make responsible decisions. So if you remove that skills piece, it feels like we're doing stuff that gives kids language or more of a memorization task. But really the core of SEL is about skill development. The 5 competencies, my God, this is like a slide that's 15 years old, but still, we need to keep talking about this stuff. I think this is one piece that is lost on individuals sometimes. I think it's worth calling it out. So like, how do we incorporate social emotional learning into our schools in Methuen? It's not just about core content. It's not just about the curriculum. I think that matters in a big way. So like delivering lessons that directly speak to content that is social emotional learning content. But the second piece, I think, is the entry point where districts maybe don't think about it as much, but it is actually the easier thing to do. We're talking about instructional practice, social emotional learning instructional practice. And this is not changing the content of what we deliver. This is maybe a math teacher or an English teacher using a specific method of delivery for their content that fosters social emotional competence. It's how we deliver the content as opposed to what we deliver for content. And I think maybe a simple example of that is who here is aware or has ever used like 4 corners? Yeah, Jim. Also add application of SEL competencies to knowledge and skills. 100%. Love that. Thank you, Jim. 4 corners is this idea where you have a stimulus that you have students respond to, and maybe it's a quote, maybe it's a specific way in which you solve a problem, and students either strongly agree, strongly disagree, or disagree with that specific stimulus, and they have to defend their stance. And students move around the room and they rethink how they actually feel about this situation. That's fostering social emotional competence, but it's not changing the content. The content that you are delivering, that stimulus, is your content. So ways in which we think about delivering SEL that are important to recognize. I think that if we just think of it as content and curriculum, then we're going to miss out on the easier thing to do, which is to bolster instructional practice. The CASEL 3 signature practices playbook is a great example of instructional practice or instructional practices that can drive the development of social emotional competence and that do not require us to really change our content. So definitely check that out. Okay. All kinds of SEL curriculum. People familiar with this stuff? Quick show of hands. You've seen this before, right? Yeah, Suzanne, thank you. There's a lot out there. Some of it is better than others, quite frankly. It has to be the case that you are picking curriculum that is going to match with what you're trying to get out of it. We use Trails to Wellness SEL curriculum. Why do I like that? Well, for me, we're a huge CBT district, and it's a cognitive theory-based curriculum. So that's a match for me. Love it. But I'm not going to turn a blind eye to Facing History in Ourselves, because that's a phenomenal program that has a lot of instructional practice built in, and that is really helping students to understand how to engage in more pro-social discussion around really serious topics. Love Facing History in Ourselves. Social thinking, zones of regulation. We use that a ton, K4. Positive action, I've seen that used through health curriculum. Second step, we use also K4. So this is all stuff that is meaningful. Rebecca, Ruler is wonderful. Yeah, well played. Another great program. I know my buddy Jason is a big Ruler fan out in Winchester. So yeah, good call out. For those of you that don't know about Ruler, talk to Rebecca. She loves it. Okay, let's keep going. These school-wide practices that are still part of Tier 1, we're talking about all school or maybe just grade level assemblies. Minding Your Mind came up earlier. And I guess I want to point out, yeah, that's a wonderful opportunity for all students to be exposed to a set of ideas, curriculum. Now it's a one-shot deal, but it still is bolstering students' understanding of social emotional learning, or maybe it's a suicide prevention oriented discussion. Maybe you are having a speaker with lived experience come in to help really ground our understanding of what it means to experience mental illness. These are all wonderful activities. It counts for sure. It needs to be part of a much larger structure. If this is the only thing you have going on, then I'll say that I worry about the uptake for students. It needs to extend beyond a single experience, but these experiences embedded within a much larger framework are phenomenal and meaningful and provide a really great callback to some of the curriculum that maybe is not as engaging as maybe a live speaker. We can talk about mental health clubs, peer support, whole school SEL programming, or things like PBIS. PBIS is 100% a part of a comprehensive school mental health system. We need to explicitly teach behavioral expectations and reinforce those instances in which students do things that meet those expectations. I want to shift a little bit to talking about trauma-informed classroom practice and this idea that behavior is communication. When students are behaving in specific ways, we have to be really good at detecting when that is volitional, maybe learned behavior, or if that behavior is a function of an underlying mental health problem or trauma. Because if we are trying to address a mental health need with a behavioral intervention, we're going to be banging our heads against the wall for a long time, and it's not going to work. We are going to be addressing the symptoms and not the cause of the behavior. Trauma directly impacts the brain. It is causing physical changes to the brain. And if we don't accept the fact that sometimes students are their best attempt at keeping themselves safe is maybe resulting in some behaviors that are disruptive. And we have to be really good about guarding against punitive measures and exclusionary discipline for students that are experiencing a stress response. There's a difference between volitional behavior and a student's stress response, and we need to acknowledge that. So trauma-informed classroom practices are grounded in some of these core concepts. I love this. Effective classroom management has many elements in common with trauma-informed classroom practice, but trauma-informed classroom practice is not just good classroom management. There are specific things that we can do that can create a trauma-sensitive classroom environment. And we can do these things and guard against re-traumatization without knowing any of the students' trauma history, because we are doing this for all students. These are the core standards of a trauma-informed classroom. These items right here. We've developed this resource, this strategy guide, Methuen, and you're all welcome to it. I'm going to drop this in the chat right now. And I'm also going to pop this open so that you can take a peek. I want to walk you through how we use this tool. We've delivered some PD that helps all of our staff understand what trauma is. I think that's pretty essential before you start in on use of a tool that will guide trauma-sensitive practice. However, I also think that many districts have already invested in that kind of PD. So let's take a peek at this. The idea behind this is it is broken into those standards of a trauma-sensitive classroom. So every standard has 2 pages. This is the emotional safety standard. On the left-hand side, you're going to see justification for why is emotional safety an important standard relative to trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed practice. Well, emotional safety is impacted by trauma. They're individuals who have been traumatized perhaps have a sense of a lack of control or poor self-concept or experiencing depression and anxiety. So this left side of the standard helps you to understand, like, why is emotional safety important in my classroom? Why should I orient to that? On the right-hand side, these are specific things that you can do to foster emotional safety in the classroom. Things like helping students to identify and label emotions, helping students to rate the intensity of their emotions. I'm going to go to page 2 of the emotional safety standard. Page 2 for every standard is a self-reflection tool. This is the self-reflection tool for the emotional safety standard. And these indicators are really just reworded, these items reworded such that you can just look at them checklist style and see if you're doing them. So if I was going to check my practice against the emotional safety standard, then I would go through these indicators and say, all right, are students supported in my classroom in identifying and labeling emotions? And maybe my knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, yeah, but I'm going to tell you 3 things that you have to remember about these. You have to do these things universally, meaning with every kid. You have to do these things consistently, meaning on a routine basis. And you have to do these things skillfully, meaning choosing the right indicator at the right time, the right practice at the right time. And when we frame it like that, people are less likely to say, yep, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that. Do you universally, consistently, and skillfully support students in identifying and labeling emotions? That's when people tend to say, oh, geez, like, well, not every kid, like some kids and sometimes, but not all the time with all kids. So I would recommend use of this tool with all of your people. I would recommend they go through this process of self-reflection in teams, because you're going to rate yourself individually. You're going to provide over here some exemplary practices that you're really proud of. You're like, yeah, I really do well this, teaching positive self-talk to students, and here's how I do it. So your whole team, your whole department's going to benefit from your exemplary practice. And then down here where you're seeking to improve, well, that's something that you can do as a team. You can pick an element that you want to improve upon as a team and really design a plan to try and up your game with that specific indicator. Does this make sense so far in terms of how this tool is used? Give me a quick thumbs up or yes in the chat for our friends that are off camera right now. Cool. All right, I appreciate that. So again, like I said, 2 pages for the emotional safety standard. And now we go into physical safety, same setup. There's a overview page and a self-reflection tool. And this is for physical safety. Then we go into having an exit strategy, an opportunity for a break, into the self-reflection tool for that. So it keeps going like that, routines, transitions, offering choice, reinforcing support seeking, providing wait time, fostering relationships, processing problem solving, reinforcing clear expectations for behavior, de-escalation, restorative consequences. Okay, this tool is being used at this point in way more places than I realized. Where we've offered this to cohorts of districts that are moving through a trauma-sensitive classroom or trauma-informed learning collaborative. So this tool is getting used across the state at this point, which is cool to see. We've gotten really positive feedback from people who have said, like, yeah, this just makes it easy to understand what trauma-sensitive practice really looks like in a simple to use format. So this is my gift to you, friends. Please steal it and use it and like put your name on it and say it was your idea. So I think it will move practice around trauma-sensitive classrooms. And again, who can tell me what are the 3 things you have to remind people about when they're checking off boxes? You have to do this, what? Universally, consistently, and skillfully. Julie, no worries. We will be sending this out. No problem. Take care, friends. We're not going to get in breakout groups, but I do want you to reflect, and maybe we'll talk about this for 2-3 minutes. In what ways is your school or district fostering tier 1 services and supports effectively? What are you doing really well right now? And I recognize that it's late in the day. We've got some people that are split between obligations. So we'll only look for a quick report out here. Maybe just one example. In the chat's fine. Come off mute if you can. I mean, I heard from some of you that you're using, oh, Lisa, go ahead.
PBIS, I would say we're doing an effective job with. Sorry, I'm on the road. Sorry if there's a lot of background noise.
Oh, Lisa, no worries. Really appreciate being here. PBIS is a phenomenal example. That is fostering tier 1 across an entire building, district, potentially. So I love that. Really good call out. And it matches with the definition.
And we're meeting after school on Tuesday because we're going to do a video with staff of expected versus unexpected behaviors and all of the different areas in school where we see unexpected behaviors.
Oh, that's great, Lisa. Love that. Definitely, that's an impressive approach to teaching expectations. Rebecca offers in the chat, our district is integrating a block for SEL into the elementary schedule for next year. That's phenomenal, Rebecca. That's going to allow for tier 1, right? Everyone's getting that. Every student is getting that. So phenomenal. All right, let's keep rolling. We've got about 30-ish minutes left. If we finish early, I'm sure you're not going to be super sad. Tier 2, I described what we meant by this earlier, and I'll emphasize that, friends, this is the forgotten tier. By an honest show of hands or yes or no in the chat, who here feels as though their tier 2 services, and especially their group-based services, are going really, really well? Anybody? No, it's hard. It's really hard to do, but it's essential. Let's talk about this, the forgotten tier. What we envision is this beautiful MTSS triangle that has a balanced middle. We're servicing kids effectively and efficiently with temporal and less intense interventions. But what actually happens is we refer students immediately to tier 3 services. We go straight to intensive individual interventions. We go straight to an IEP. We go straight to programmatic services. And what does that do? Well, our MTSS becomes top heavy. We are super inefficient. It undermines our universal supports and preventative services. We orient to crisis. We're reactive. We're not getting ahead of problems. We don't prevent. That's no good. This is especially no good in a time where we have to be super nimble, really efficient, really effective, because we've got 30 to 40% of our kids with moderate to severe symptom presentation. Fair? Okay. Few considerations for tier 2. We have to distinguish mental health from SEL interventions. Check in, check out is a wonderful SEL intervention. And so are many groups for kids. But I think it's important that we call out that there are curriculum-based groups that are delivering curriculum, that are delivering a sequenced series of lessons. And that is different from a cognitive behavioral therapy group that is grounded in good session structure and incorporates evidence-based therapeutic techniques. So there is some distinction to be had. Do we need both? We do. But we can't just call all groups the same thing. We do have to be careful and, or rather responsive to the cultural relevance of different groups, making sure that we're matching interventions to our population. And we also want to make sure that our individual counseling is proactive, that it's goal-oriented and focused rather than just kind of meeting with kids, which sometimes we see. Sometimes it's the case that we've been meeting with a kid for 1 to 2 years, and if we were prompted to report out on like, what are you working on? Like, what's the goal of your individual meeting? I think sometimes the answer is like, I don't know, like, we just keep meeting, and that doesn't lend itself to great outcomes. So why group therapy? It is super efficient and effective. We're talking about 5 to 15% of the population. Prevention and promotion using small groups and embedded strategies has been shown to be really, really effective. If we're going to get to all the students that need care, we need group-based interventions. And this is a way that we can actually provide services to students with emerging concerns. I think a lot of times we go straight to students with moderate to severe symptom presentation, but when we're reacting to screening results, I always have to remind people, like, please take a look at those high, mild to low, moderate students and recognize that this may be an indication of an emerging concern that you can head off. And enrolling a student in group might provide them with the knowledge and skills they need to be able to not continue the trajectory of mental health problems. This is a little bit of info on CBT group model. It has been shown to be effective in school-based settings, for sure. Research has shown that. Prevailing treatment modality for anxiety-related issues is CBT. CBT is the gold standard for addressing anxiety, which our kids experience an awful lot. It is also the gold standard for depression, and it is super effective for trauma. So if we are going to be providing services in a school in an efficient, effective way, we've got to look to evidence-based stuff, and CBT is a match for schools for sure. In fact, I'm going to argue that there's no better home for cognitive behavioral therapy than an institution in which every blessed individual is charged with improving students' critical thinking skills. which is one of the core components of good CBT. These are the key components of our group model. We're talking about smaller groups. Groups are typically fewer than 12 people. 8 to 10 is typically what I see. They're closed groups. We're talking 8 to 10 weeks, and they're targeting specific mental health problems. So it is a focused group. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, maybe it's mixed internalizing concerns. Psychoeducation to start, but then we move into delivery of therapeutic technique within the actual session. We're talking about live in-session CBT techniques being used and inter-session homework. So maybe assigning a behavioral experiment, CBT thought record, exposure trial, maybe some behavioral activation scheduling. And we do progress monitor these groups. This quote's important. Group psychotherapy views interactions between the group members as the vehicle of change. It is a wonderful thing to see the temperature lowered at that first group meeting and all of the students looking around and realizing that, oh, I'm not the only one experiencing this problem. This isn't unique to me. I'm not alone. There are others who are grappling with this problem. I'm going to skip this. You can take a peek at this later. This is a sample MTSS map at an elementary level. And again, at this tier 2 place, we're seeing things like check in, check out. That's still a great intervention, but we also have groups. We have maybe some one-to-one counseling. We have some para-professional supports, maybe some a little bit heavier accommodations, but not quite tier 3. So I call this out because I think it's a great activity to actually run through the interventions that you offer across all tiers so that you can have a true understanding of where your gaps are and what you need to build out. I'm going to guess that if you truly map out your tier 2 interventions, it's going to be somewhat lacking. There's a lot of intentional work that needs to be done to get tier 2 off the ground. One thing that I'll mention that has worked really well for us is marrying our screening window to our group referral window. It allows for us to have a critical mass of kids at the same time. Tier 3, I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, but we're talking about intensive individual interventions. We will skip this, but I would ask you to reflect on this. Let's imagine a student sends you an email during lunch, shares that this will be the last time you'll hear from them. You contact your administrator and the classroom teacher, but the student's unaccounted for. You now have no idea where the student is. And I guess what I would ask you to reflect on is, are there any written procedures to guide your response to the situation? How are you going to deal with this? Do you know what to do in this situation? Have people thought through this before? Who will you be contacting to facilitate an effective response to this situation? Again, is there guidance around this? And does your district currently have a plan to address situations that occur outside of the normal school day? Let's imagine this is an email that you received at night, maybe at 10 o'clock, and you call the kids home and they're not home. You have no way of contacting them. So like, what would you do then? I mention this because critical incident management is a part of tier 3 for sure. It's an essential component of a comprehensive school mental health system. The systems and practices that we design to ensure the safety of students and staff need to be established and explicitly taught in advance of the crisis. If we wait for the crisis to establish policy and procedure, things are going to go sideways. I remember maybe 2 years ago at this point talking to Paul Hydermuth about directionless pressure. I love this concept of reducing the pressure that staff experience by giving them really good resources so that they know what to do. When you don't know what to do and you don't know how to be effective in supporting kids and families, you feel this directionless pressure, like you don't know what the next step is and you want to do right, but you simply don't have the wherewithal, understanding, or resources to support your next steps. These are some crisis protocols that we've developed for our mental health staff. These are some crisis protocols for all staff. These will be embedded in the presentation. You can take a look at them later. This is another great resource that will be embedded in there, the School Threat Assessment and Response System, or STARS, which is a group out of the Northeast Massachusetts Law Enforcement Council. So this is a regional crisis team that responds to schools where there's maybe been a loss of a student, loss of a staff member, some kind of community event that is causing distress to the population, and that team supports the response. And they have developed a wonderful toolkit. Shout out to my buddy Jason in Winchester. Crisis recovery teams are another piece that I would say great call out to a preventative model. If you have teams on call, we're reducing that pressure that we feel around, like, what would we do in the event of a crisis? We've developed these crisis recovery teams, and they're on a 5-week on-call rotation. So really, we're not asking an awful lot of our teams, just that like every 5 weeks, you might get the call up. We very rarely activate these teams, but it is a nice warm blanket to know that they're there. Organized on a 5-week, organized to ensure that, you know, if a critical incident occurs, no one building is going to bear the brunt of the response. These are all kinds of procedures that we've developed. They're yours to steal. Home visit procedures, crisis protocols. I want to call out that, you know, when we're talking about individuals who've experienced trauma, the likelihood that there's going to be potentially serious incidents that we have to address goes way up. So in that we have all just gone through an incredibly traumatic experience, just know that our level of response has to match that, and our level of readiness has to match that as well. Quick yes or no, or maybe I don't know. Do you have written procedures for engaging in suicide and risk assessment and threat assessment in your district? Do we have access to this stuff? Rebecca, you're a yes, that's great. Anyone else? If you don't, if you're looking for stuff, I really feel like it's critical that we have Felicity, very little. Well, then steal away, my friend. Suicide risk assessment protocols, like what do we do and who is doing that suicide risk assessment? Documentation so that we can actually, you know, memorialize what happened. Great tools like the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. CSTAG is a threat assessment protocol that is really well vetted. Lots of other additional free resources. I'll open this one really quickly. The Columbia is used all over the place. And it's actually like when you go under the setting in which it's used, all kinds of people are oriented to use of the Columbia. And, you know, in reading up on that, I really wanted to understand why that was. And they're really promoting the idea that everyone should have some skill in being able to, or some guidance in being able to talk to kids or another human being about suicide. Now, that's not saying everyone should conduct suicide risk assessments, but they are providing this tool as a way to guide decision-making about what should happen next, so that a coach, a teacher, a friend could ultimately guide the next step for someone that mentions that they're thinking about suicide, and ultimately initiate a warm handoff with a mental health service provider. So we use the Columbia and Methuen, pretty straightforward, and it helps to guide decision-making around next steps. I'll breeze through this a little bit, but you know, when we're talking tier 3, we're also talking those intensive supports that are maybe programmatic or more again, we're really upping the game on the frequency and duration of these services. Students absent from or unable to function in school for an extended period of time, yeah, they might need an intensive support. Avoidant or disengaged students, students with serious medical conditions. They've had disruptions in school attendance. Students who are in school more consistently but unable to access learning due to a mental health challenge. Think of maybe a student that is making it into the building and then immediately going to the counseling office and staying there all day. Absent from or unable to function in school due to a traumatic experience. So the BRIGHT model is one way in which we can provide some intensive intervention to students. Rebecca, just curious if you use the Columbia with elementary as well. Rebecca, we do, and it might be the case that we have to, adapt the language slightly, or, actually read. Well, I mean, we're asking students these questions. We're not like having them fill out the Columbia on their own. So yeah, we're reading it to students and even our youngest kids. But it might require a little bit of adaptation in terms of language. That's a great question, but I think it's a structured way to get at the end goal of really understanding what's the level of risk. I'll say that it is one tool to add to your toolbox, but it is I think you do have to continue to use other observations and data to make that decision, and also just really good case consultancy with colleagues and seeking supervision. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Rebecca. So the BRIGHT model is really designed to support students returning from long-term absence and typically psychiatric hospitalization. It's really their home base. It is a space that provides physical and emotional safety. There's dedicated staffing. We are using customized support plans. So an academic plan, clinically informed plans. We're talking about family communication, care coordination. So the support plan is meant to be pretty comprehensive. It does align with the school-wide system to effectively transition kids out of the program. It's not meant to be a forever thing. It's meant to be a briefer, or we're trying to make it a brief intervention. Some students are going to stay in the program for maybe a couple months, but it's not meant to be a forever kind of thing. Plenty of districts have special education programming that points at students with emotional needs. I think some questions that I have that you want to make sure, if you have a maybe therapeutic intervention program as an example, is it really truly therapeutic? Like, is it goal oriented and focused? Are we teaching skills? Are we teaching active coping? Are we integrating strong proactive care coordination and family engagement? Are we using evidence-based therapeutic modalities? Because friends, there are plenty of programs out there that are calling themselves therapeutic programs. And they don't do any of that stuff, and I worry about that. That's a problem. All right, let's keep going. This is a quick call out to the BRIGHT model. Thank you, Brookline Center. Thank you, BRIGHT program. The BRIGHT model is, I think this is a nice way of kind of calling out those things that are in that integrated support plan, and also just laying out like the logistical or I guess like really the resources that are requisite to stand up a program like this. Again, dedicated staffing, space, and really drawing upon a coordinated service plan that is robust for a small set of students, but really easing that transition back. Unfortunately, what I tend to see in a lot of districts is student returns from long-term absence or hospitalization, and we just kind of drop them back into their schedule after a re-entry meeting, and we say we're going to check in with them an awful lot and like provide them care. And the reality, unfortunately, is that that falls through because of all of the other competing needs that students have, and that student might fall into a situation where they are not returning to school effectively, and maybe dropping out of school, maybe entering into a cycle of avoidance where they're staying home from school. We have two priority populations for our BRIGHT program. Category H, so students who they've had a hospitalization for sure, and they've missed at least 5 consecutive school days. We make a referral to the Bridge program, and we see if they're a fit. It's the case that many students who are Category H are meeting the definition, but we also have Category N. So students that we judge to have a need, and it's more prevention-oriented approach to enrolling them in Bridge to stop maybe a cycle of avoidance, to stop what we are seeing written on the wall in terms of students who are perhaps lagging in their attendance and need support sooner than later. And this is a call out for all of the services we provide. I think that we have to be intentional about planning for the end at the beginning. The first conversation we have with kids, whether we're talking something as significant as a Bridge program or something as simple as maybe a social emotional learning lesson, is that it's going to end. We want to get to an end point. We want to celebrate that we don't need this thing anymore. The first thing we should talk about with the kid enrolling in a group-based service or individual therapy is, listen, I want to be obsolete to you. I want to be useless to you in this ride. My job is to get you to a point where you can go it alone and you don't need me anymore. And we're going to celebrate that as huge growth and something worth celebrating. The goal of therapy is for it to end and for students to move beyond a point in which they need us. And we need to communicate that really clearly at the beginning of any service. So I want to close with just a quick reflection on, a takeaway from today's discussion that you feel like you're going to share with your colleagues. It may be a goal you have for your school or district related to school mental health interventions. Pick one of those and drop in the chat what you're thinking. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to chat with you today. I recognize we're late in the year, we're late in the day. It's beautiful outside, but you stuck in here and we're along for the ride, and I appreciate that. So yeah, one takeaway or one goal you have relative to school mental health as you move forward into what I'm hoping is a much more normal year than this year was. What do we think? One takeaway or one goal you have. Felicity, you've shared your goals with me in the past. Looking into the SEL curriculums, cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like I feel as an adjustment counselor in Worcester, I just do 2 and 3, tier 2 and 3, and it would be nice to participate in some more of the tier 1. Well, get some more tier 1 stuff going.
Nice, I appreciate that. Thank you. And Rebecca, you're offering, I'm looking forward to beefing up our MTSS services. Love it. Appreciate that. Jim, tier 2 is the forgotten tier. It's a good takeaway. I appreciate that, Jim. Well, friends, like I said, I really enjoyed hanging out with you. You are you're the hardcore bunch that wanted to hang out today, and that's cool with me. If you want some information on sessions that we're going to be offering moving forward, here's the place to get it. Super happy to stick around if people have questions. And here's how to get a hold of me and how to join MASMHC if you're interested. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful end to the week and a very well-deserved long weekend. Take good care.